Sergeant Babcock isn't here yet.
Okay.
Evening, everyone. I'm Brian Kane from the MBTA Advisory Board. I guess I'm last on your agenda, but I'll be here till the bitter end.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay, so we're going to give everybody one more minute to join and see if Sergeant Babcock joins us so that we can take up all of the public auto licenses.
Oh, he's
excited.
joining now.
Okay. I think we can officially get started. It is 7 o'clock.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. We are being both audio and video recorded. At the start of the meeting from the council, I'm joined by Vice Chair of the committee, Councillor Downs, Councillor Block, Councillor Lucas, Councillor Bixby, and it looks like Councillor Wright is joining right now. Our first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Councilor Grossman, you should do the
Yes.
first one separate because that's a new request.
No, I will. I was
Oh,
just
okay.
sort of setting the groundwork that we have 8 docket items that are public auto licenses. We will take those up first, and we'll recognize Sergeant Babcock for each one of those. Those generally are relatively quick, and then we're going to go into our final item of the evening, which is a presentation and a discussion with the MBTA Advisory Board. So it looks like Councillor Lipoff is joining us right now as well. Item 436-24, requesting a new public auto license. This is Tom Mountain, 117 Truman Road, requesting one new public auto license. Sergeant Babcock, let me turn it to you for your review of this application.
Good evening, everyone. I did the inspection last night, and it passed. It's a brand new car, 2024 Cadillac SUV. It has a dominant reading of 4175. All the appropriate paperwork corresponds to the VIN. So it passed inspection last night.
Okay.
Yeah,
let's just take this one. I think we're going to do them one at a time.
Okay.
Councilors, do we have comments or questions about this application?
Yeah, traditionally, the question is, have they passed their inspection? Have they paid all their fines? Are they up to date? And Sergeant Babcock says they are. I'm ready to vote it.
Yes.
Okay.
The
Would you like-
gentleman, sorry, Becky.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
The gentleman has no outstanding fees, fines, and it passed inspection.
Is there a motion on this item?
I'll move to approve.
Motion to approve by Councillor Downs. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Let's see, how many are we present right now? 1, 2,
7.
3. Okay, so that's 7-0. Ms. Delaney, can we take up the rest of these all collectively and have Sergeant Babcock review them together?
Absolutely.
Okay, in that case, we are going to take up item 437-24, Michael Gimmelfarb requesting a renewal of a public auto license at 274 Dedham Street. 438-24, Lysine Belouchet, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, requesting a public auto license at 32 Adams Street. 439-24, Donald LaPlante of 21 Parker Street, requesting renewal of a public auto license. 440-24, Don Raj Mahasi of 275 Grove Street, requesting renewal of a public auto license. Number 441-24, Rajiv Kumar of 2323 Washington Street, apartment G3, requesting renewal of a public auto license. 442-24, Vasif Vali of 132 Charles Street, apartment 303, requesting renewal of a public auto license. And 443-24, Abdurrahman Fella of 159 Washington Street, number 1, requesting renewal of a public auto license. Sergeant, if I could ask you to just review each of those.
Thank you. 437-24 is a paperwork is a fine. His check was received by the city on 9/20/24. He never contacted us for inspection, so I cannot go forward with his request.
Okay, so for 437-24, could I think a motion to hold would probably be appropriate.
So moved.
Oh,
Okay.
excuse me. Can I just pipe in here for a minute?
Sure.
Okay, he had, let me see. Sorry. Oh, God, where is it? Just a moment, my apologies.
That's okay.
Okay, his vehicle was inspected and passed May 29 of 2024. And they only have to be inspected once per year between the dates of March 1 to April 30th.
So why would there be a discrepancy between that inspection and what Sergeant Babcock has on file?
I can answer it, Becky. I took over on May 30th, and there's no records in our office for this inspection. So I don't know if it got displaced when I moved in, and the past gentleman, Sergeant Wade, moved out. So I couldn't find anything. I went looking because anyone who didn't call us, I went looking for their application for inspections. This one I could not find.
Okay, so Ms. Delaney, do you have the record of that available?
I have it from Sergeant Wade last year.
Okay,
And that's that's why I have it on my graph that it did pass inspection last year.
okay. Does that
So that should be
does
fine
that
in our book.
satisfy you, Sergeant Babcock, and members of the committee?
That's fine. As long as it was inspected, that's my only concern.
Okay. Why don't we move through the rest of the list?
Okay. 438-24, Boston Cool Ride Limo. He came in on, pardon me, on 10/30/24, was inspected, no fines outstanding, no fees outstanding, and he passed inspection. It's a new car, 24 Escalade, with 9,074 miles on it. So we're fine with it.
Okay,
Next one is 439-24, Don's Car Service. He was inspected on 11/4/24. There was no problems with the car, no fines, no any fees. It's a 2024 Toyota Sienna with 9,600 miles on it, and that's fine for us as well.
okay.
I'm gonna, Danielle, if this gentleman passed, I don't have any records of it. It's the next one is 440-24.
Yes, that passed inspection May 31 of 2024.
There you go. Okay, so Councilor Grossman, we're fine with it as long as we have an inspection that was sent over to Danielle.
And Ms. Delaney, you have that paperwork submitted to you. Is that how it works?
Yes, either by phone call or email and I added to a graph that just keeps like going on and on each, twice a year to the police department.
Okay.
The next one's 441-24. Again, the paperwork's appropriate, everything's fine. It's, I don't have an inspection here.
He passed inspection May 31 of 2024.
I'm glad we kept good records, huh?
I will attach this graph to the report.
That
Okay.
would be great.
The next one is 442-24. He had emailed Danielle that he was in the process of buying a new car. So this one has to be put on hold and postponed until he gets his new car.
Sergeant Babcock, can I interrupt?
Yep.
He's not purchasing a new car right now. And his current vehicle that he has was inspected March 14 of 2024.
Okay.
And you said, Ms. Delaney, that's sufficient, March through, the term is essentially March through April?
March 1st through April 30th, yes.
Okay.
Or when deemed necessary.
Okay, the last one is 443-24. AB Incorporated, he came in last night. He passed inspection. All his paperwork was appropriate. There was no outstanding fines. It's a 2024 Chevy Suburban. There's 759 miles on it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you to you both for the information, and especially to you, Ms. Delaney, for keeping really careful track. Obviously, in a time of transition, it's, natural for paperwork to be passed around between different folks. So really appreciate you keeping track of that. And I do think that it's important to attach that so that we have a full record of the inspections before us for our full council vote. Do we have any comments or questions on any of the requests for a license that we just went over? Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to verify something. I'm not sure what the process is, so. But the addresses on the that are listed in the agenda, one of them is not a home address, it's a business address. I just want to make sure that's acceptable.
Do you want me to answer that, or Danielle?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Sergeant Babcock.
It's fine, as long as it's an address in Newton.
Okay.
We've
All right,
had, we've had in the past people try to come in and use some of the addresses, Medford addresses, because they can't get their license over there. So it's been caught by the clerk's office or by our office, but this one's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need
Any
a motion?
other comments or questions? Councilor Downs?
Do you need a motion to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
I'll take a motion.
All of the recently discussed public auto license renewals?
Motion to approve by Councilor Downs. Any further discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
I'll abstain, Chair, since I just arrived.
Okay, so we have 7 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention. Okay, that takes care of that portion of our meeting. Thank you, Sergeant Babcock, and thanks again, Ms. Delaney.
Okay, guys, have a nice night.
You too.
You too, Cap.
We are going on to 376-24. This is Councilors Downs and Grossman requesting a presentation and discussion with the MBTA Advisory Board about the consequences for Newton and the region of underfunding of the MBTA and possible council action. We are joined by Brian Kane of the MBTA Advisory Board. So, Mr. Kane, let me turn it over to you. I don't know if you're joined by any other members of the board tonight, but thank you for coming. We're eager to have the discussion, and I'll turn the floor over to you for a presentation, and then we'll engage in a discussion.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And let me just also say, I appreciate all that you do. Approving auto licenses is not fun or sexy, but it has to be done. I chair the transportation board in Brookline next door, so I know what you're going through, and we have our annual renewals coming up too. So very good timing. Can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me just talk a little bit first of all about who the advisory board is, what it does, and then I'll talk a little bit about the MBTA's financial and fiscal cliff. So very quickly, the advisory board, I do not work for the governor of Massachusetts. I do not work for the MBTA. I work for 178 cities and towns. So the members of the advisory board are mayors, select board chairs, city managers, town managers. Mayor Fuller represents Newton and has for the last 8 years. She's very ably represented on the advisory board by David Kozes and Ned Codd from time to time. And they are fun people to work with and very, very good professionals to work with. Most of the work of the organization is done in committee. As you can imagine, with 178 communities, it's difficult to get everyone together. So we do a lot of work through committee, which is just to say, or this is just a demonstration of or a graphic displaying what we have. I mentioned the 178 communities. This is the most up-to-date map. The MBTA Advisory Board communities are made up of every city or town that hosts an MBTA station or abuts one that does. Our newest members are New Bedford and Fall River as of this past July. And since September, myself and 2 colleagues have been on the road. We are trying to visit as many communities as we can before the harshness of winter sets in. So we've been to 40 cities and towns so far, as far west as Worcester, as far north as Haverhill, and as far south, we've gotten down to Attleboro. So a lot more communities to talk to. We've spoken to most of the inner core, and it's been really enjoyable getting out to see people. As you folks know better than most, it's difficult to sort of understand and represent folks unless you get to talk to them. So I've really enjoyed getting out and talking to folks. Madam Chair, do you want me to take questions or how do you want to do this, ma'am?
Well, let me just check in with Counselor Downs quickly, and if we see a bunch of hands going up at once, maybe I'll just ask you to pause. But Counselor Downs, let me recognize you for a minute and see if you want to speak now or have a question for later.
Well, I had a question to this section of the talk, if you don't mind, Mr. Kane. 178 cities and towns, I get it, probably each one has 1 vote. How was the advisory board created? Is it statutory? Is it voluntary? And how much power do you actually wield? And if so, how?
The organization in its current form was created in 1964, the same year that the MBTA was created under Mass General Law. Its predecessors date back to 1949 when the MTA Advisory Board was created. It is based on the fact that it used to be the 14 cities, inner core cities and towns, including Newton, were responsible for paying the MBTA's deficits. In 1964, the 14 communities were expanded to 78, and that is sort of the dark colored communities on this map, sort of the 2 blues, the darker blue and the lighter blue. And then in the year 2000, it was expanded to the 174, and we've added 4 communities since then. So that's everything that's not in white on this map. The cities and towns pay assessments to the MBTA. This year, it's about $190 million. A small percentage of that, 0.025%, is peeled off, and that is given to the advisory board to pay for its expenses. We have 3 employees, myself, a deputy director, Handel Swidltowski, who served on the select board in Sharon, and a young woman, Isabella McKinnon, who just graduated from college and is working for us doing communications. In terms of authority, up until 2009, we had a line item veto over the MBTA's budget. In a so-called reform that year, we lost our ability to do line item vetoes, and so now we're more strictly advisory. I have cultivated a pretty strong relationship with the board of directors. I used to work at the T. I was there for 5 years. I know a lot of the leadership there still. And I've developed a pretty good media presence. I'll be on Radio Boston tomorrow, for example. So that is really the main vehicle that we use now to get our members and our messages across.
Thank you. I mean, it would be great if you had a little bit more authority, but it's great to know what the limits of that are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. So the fiscal cliff. So since I mentioned since September, we've been talking to communities about the fiscal cliff. This is not news, but it is surprising to a lot of folks. When we started this process, the fiscal 26 seemed like it was a long time off. As 2024 has crept forward, it's now not that far away. So basically, starting in July, the T has a $700 million operating deficit. That's just for the operating budget. That's the stuff that pays the day-to-day activities. It's a structural deficit, as you can see from the red box on the screen. I'll try to zoom in because those numbers are pretty small. There we go. That deficit grows. That's because it's a structural deficit. Basically, the T, when it was recreated in 2001, a large proportion of how it was proposed to be funded was based on the Massachusetts state sales tax, which had grown by an average of 6.5% throughout the 1990s. And in the first decade of this century grew by 2.3%. So basically all of the revenue projections that were included in the state sales tax, which the T gets a dedicated proportion of, did not come to fruition. The difference between what was projected and actual is 9 to 16 billion that the T would have had over the last 25 years. So that plus a series of policy choices made by the powers that be around debt. The T has one of the largest debt portfolios for an agency of its size in the nation, have sort of brought it to the point where it's at now. So its expenses are growing in areas like debt and headcounts, which I'll talk about in a second. At the same time, while its revenues have never grown. So you might be asking then, well, what about its infrastructure? They reported a year ago, 2023, that the infrastructure backlog is $24 billion. That's the cost that it would take to get everything back to operating sort of at current standards. And a great example of this are the 3 commuter rail stations in Newton that I know you all know so well. We had a very exciting announcement last week in your city hall. I was delighted to be there. But in order to sort of upgrade those stations, for instance, that's part of the $24 billion backlog, the cost of those upgrades. So I think we all know that the stations in Newton need upgrading, renewal, to be refreshed, to be made ADA compliant. And so that is an example of something of what the state of good repair backlog is like. And you can see sort of in this box where the estimates are for the cost. Now, a lot of these numbers have obviously changed in the last year and a half. Some have grown, some have decreased. The MBTA has told its board of directors and told us that even if it spends $2 billion a year, it will not begin to sort of reduce this $24 billion backlog number. It's really going to take something like $2.5 to $3 billion every year. And the way to think about that is for a generation, we neglected our infrastructure here in Massachusetts while other things were done, other things were prioritized, which means that our generation, the folks that are here now, we have to basically pay 2 generations worth of costs. So that is what it's going to take to really bring the T into a state of good repair. And that doesn't count expansion, that doesn't talk about electrification, that doesn't talk about any of the other stuff that we all know we need to have in this Commonwealth and in this region. I mentioned workforce and headcount. You might be wondering why their expenses are growing at a time when their revenue is dropping. And it really is, it's a very good question. I asked them that a lot. And basically, in 2022, the federal government came in, the FTA came in and basically told the T in bureaucratic speak, which is what that quotation there is, that it doesn't have enough people to operate the system safely, reliably, and efficiently. And as such, they've had to go on a hiring spree to bring their headcount, their number of employees, to a level that allows them to operate the system safely, efficiently, and reliably. I can speak to this personally. I was at the T in 2018 when it was at its absolute lowest, when the watchword everywhere was austerity. We had 5,500 employees. It was simply unviable. It was too few people to operate the system that we had. And the federal government backed that up when it came in and sort of said, you need to hire people. Now, what that means is they're hiring folks at a time when they are facing this budget crunch. And that means that if we have to do the worst case scenario and lay some folks off, it would be all those folks that are newly hired that we would be the first ones to go. It's a first in, first out unionized environment. So all those bus drivers and dispatchers and folks that the T just hired and spent millions of dollars training would be the first ones, unfortunately, that would be let go.
And hold on 1 second. We have a
Sure,
hand from Councillor Lipoff.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. While we passed by the receipts, the income, what is the T doing about the lost fares? This started with my 2 20-year-old daughters saying, I'm riding the T free. I said, what are you talking about? Well, the thing's broken. They say, just get on. And then, I started talking to some people over there, and then there were articles in the paper. Upwards to 25–30% of the receipts are not collected. Is that something that's on your mind? Is that something that they're trying to collect every fare instead of letting 25–30% go?
So I was going to talk about fares in a minute, but I'm happy to answer your question now, sir.
Sorry, I got ahead of you. Sorry.
Oh no, you've been ahead of me for years, I'm sure. In terms of fare collection, so yes, they do not collect 100% of their fares. It's been a constant annoyance. I mean, I take the Green Line, I get on a Brookline Hills, I get waved on. It drives me insane. I don't think we're ever going to be in a position where we want the agency to collect 100% of fares and be really a police draconian state sort of a thing, but they should absolutely increase the percentage that is collected. And they have taken steps to do that. And I give GM Mang a lot of credit for this. On commuter rail, they've installed gates at North Station. North Station has seen a 30% increase in the number of folks activating their mobile tickets and getting their their passes validated. On the north side, the gates are planned to come to South Station and Back Bay as soon as development projects at those facilities are completed in 25 and 26. And that will help a lot with commuter rail. In terms of the Green Line, you might have read about fare engagement professionals that the T has hired recently. So they're starting with a relatively small number of, I think, 20 folks who are out there on the system every day, doing education and encouraging folks to pay their fares. I've met them. I met one when I was getting on in Somerville recently, and very polite, very nice guy. Told me, reminded me to sort of pay my fare in advance, et cetera, and it was a very good experience. That is the second thing. The third thing is on the Green Line, you might have noticed at the rear doors, they now accept payments via credit card, via mobile app, via your watch, via whatever kind of payment you want to use. And that is meant to sort of encourage folks who board on the back door to tap their cards. Now, we're never going to get 100% of BU kids, for instance, on ComAv going for a couple of stops. When I was at the T, when I was working for a couple of general managers, we looked at what the cost would be to enforce and police that almost to 100%, and it would cost more than would be collected in fares to really enforce it to 100%. So I think the T is on the right track in terms of what it's attempting to do, which is get most of the fares. There's always going to be turnstile jumpers. There's always going to be folks that just don't want to do the right thing. And I
But
think, we need to protect them with law enforcement or go after them with law enforcement. But I think from a policy level, I do think they are taking that very seriously, sir.
That's all well and good, and I don't disagree with what you've said, except for the fact that we've got technology moving forward, and you talked about a little bit of it on the Green Line, but to be able to collect fares of people coming on, that's the whole point. And it's not turnstile jumpers, it's people that want to pay, that says, sorry, it's broken. So I'm sure
Yeah.
you guys are upgrading readers and and doing the best you can. I just want to make sure this is in your focus, because that's upwards to $500 million loss based on your numbers, right?
Well, I'm not sure on the 20 to 30% number you quoted. I'd have to check that. I believe you. I just have to check it. But I don't think that the fare revenue loss is that substantial. Although, New York City is suggesting that it is losing 40% of bus fares from folks getting on the back door. So these numbers can grow very quickly, very exponentially.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
We do have one more hand from Counselor Wright.
Yeah, I was going to bring up, I reviewed your slides and presentation from the summer, and 15% of the revenue is from, the T revenue was from tickets and stuff. In my personal experience, I don't take it regularly, but when I take the train in from West Newton, maybe 25% or 30% of the time they collect the fares or show the fares. The rest of the time they don't. And that's much more, than what's on the Green Line, maybe not as many people. So, I mean, that's frustrating for me because you're not, you don't have enough money, but you're not collecting it. The second thing, and you just kind of went over, and I don't know if we're going to talk about it or talk about it later, and the 50 million for the Newtonville train station, and we're in this fiscal crisis, and then the whole thing, Lynn was, I think, 50 or 60 million, and they're going to have a center platform, and they're talking about 50 million for 2 platforms, and to me, this does not add up that 50 million is going to be enough for the 2 platforms, and how much is actually coming from the T versus, how much of that money is in jeopardy from the T?
So a couple of things there. Thank you for the question. I think I agree with you that when my fare is not collected on commuter rail, it's incredibly frustrating. And we have spoken extensively to Keolis about this, which is the T's operator. In fact, its general manager now comes before the advisory board's commuter rail committee quarterly. And we ask him exactly the same kind of questions you're asking, ma'am. So you're on the right track. He's informed us that they have continually re-educated conductors around the necessity to collect every single fare. He suggested that there's a dozen, maybe 15 or maybe 20 at the high end, sort of recalcitrant employees who simply refuse to do their job. It's incredibly frustrating. We have encouraged him to go through the process of removing those folks. It's very complicated, as you can imagine. Railroad labor law is very complicated. But I completely agree with you that it's incredibly frustrating when that doesn't happen. And I do want you to know that, at least from the advisory board's perspective, it's something that we continually ask Keolis to do a better job of. And I know that the T itself also asked them to do the same. With respect to Newtonville, I don't know exactly the source of the $50 million. I think, from what I heard at the event last week, that's coming from MBTA revenue bonds, which is money that they borrow against future sales tax revenue and assessment revenue that they get every year. So that they borrow about $600 million every year. So I'm pretty sure they'll be able to continue to borrow that money into the near term. The challenge might be around getting the folks, having the employees necessary to get the contracts out the door, get the money out the door, get the bids and all that stuff out the door. So that's where the potential number of layoffs that would have to come puts that project not in jeopardy, but could significantly slow it down.
But is that 50 million really realistic when Lynn is going to have a center platform, which is only 2 elevators versus 4, and that's 60 million? So I don't understand how they came up with the 50 million, and I thought there was more before. So yeah, it would be good to see the data that supports that.
Sure. And I'm not sure of that particular answer. But let me see what I can do to find that for you, and I'll share it with Chair Grossman.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am.
Thank you. We don't have any other hands right now, so why don't you continue on?
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. So just and to put this all in perspective, folks might remember in 2021, sort of before a lot of the federal pandemic money was available, the T put a series of service cuts on the table that you see here, ending all cutting paratransit service in 33 communities, including Newton. Not all of Newton, but some of Newton would have been affected. Frequency cuts on the Green Line, subway, other subway lines, and bus. Ending all commuter rail service at 9 o'clock, not running it on weekends, ending all ferry service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would have generated $142 million in 2021. The deficit that faces the authority and faces us in July is 5 times greater. There is not 5 times the amount of service that can be eliminated and still sort of operate a system. So to me, this is an existential threat, not just to the MBTA, but to sort of passenger rail and commuter service in and around the region. So we really don't have the luxury of kind of doing what has been done in the past, which is sort of kicking the can down the road, fiddling around the edges, doing some refinancing or something and coming up with a couple of million. This is going to take a concerted effort. I serve on the governor's transportation task force representing the advisory board. We've made decent progress. I would love to tell you that it will be the answer to all of our questions. I don't think that will happen. This is going to take really a legislative and a leadership effort from Beacon Hill. I can tell you the governor, and again, I do not work for the governor. The governor and the lieutenant governor understand this and take this very seriously. We've had conversations with them. I've spent a good amount of time up in the State House recently, spoken to 15 or 20 reps and senators, including Senator Cream, just to make sure that everyone understands that this is coming. And the challenge really is in the timing. This is going to start to become a problem right around February, March, or April of 2025. I mentioned earlier that seemed like a long time off at one point, but it's right around the corner. The House will not have a House Chair of Transportation at the start of next session. That gentleman is retiring. They will not get themselves organized into committees and agree to joint rules, et cetera, until sort of February, March, and the T is going to have to announce its layoffs and service cuts if it has to go there in sort of right around the same time. So this is all going to happen at once around the same time. And that's the reason why myself and my colleagues have been talking to city and town officials like yourselves to just say that this is coming. Bad things potentially can happen. But we can fix it. We can get ahead of it. And so we're not asking you to take a position on any particular revenue source or any particular set of solutions. We did chart legislative solutions here for the last 25 years. The legislature, to its credit, has tried to address this. But it is a challenge to say that this is going to have to get addressed by us as a Commonwealth. I do know that we can do this. I think we have the smarts. I think we have the resources. I think we have the people. I think the T leadership is in the right position right now. And again, I do not work for the MBTA. I think Phil Eng is the best GM I've seen in 20 odd years. So I think we have some of the right pieces in place to fix this and not have to reduce service at a time when we need more of it to fight climate change. I do think we are on the right track, no pun intended. And I do think that we can fix this. We just have to kind of put our minds to it and choose to do it. And that's all I had, ma'am. Thank you.
So let me just understand what appeared to be the bottom of that last slide. You're visiting communities because you are hopeful that elected officials in local communities will speak up in some regard, I gather. So is that your, are those sort of some bulleted things laid out that you're essentially passing along to us that you recommend we advocate for? I mean, I just want to understand if there's an ask here from you to our council, or just, you know, an FYI, you all need to
I appreciate
understand
that.
my question.
So, because I am required to work with the mayor of Newton, I will refrain from making any requests of the city council. That would have to come through the mayor's office, just because that's who I work for. I will say, however, that you would not go wrong, I don't believe, and if you happen to run into a representative or a senator, just letting them know that this is important to Newton and that you believe it needs to be tackled.
Okay, I have a number of questions, but I see that some of my colleagues do as well. So why don't I turn it over? Councillor Lucas, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kane, thank you for the presentation and being here today. I just want to touch up on what Councillor Wright had to say had to say about the $50 million in the Newtonville station. But that's not going to be enough. I'm just letting you know. I know it's not your call, but you certainly know more important people in the T than me. So hopefully you can pass that message on to them that they need to come up with additional money, because you're going to have to build into the earth on the north side of the station. There are telephone poles in there that they're going to have to be moved. So I just don't know how it's going to be done with $50 million. But what I wanted to talk about was the fair share amendment. It's been in place for a couple years now. My memory is that in the first year, there was approximately $1 billion in potential revenue. And I was just wondering what the T is going to do if they're going to ask the legislature or the governor to free up some or most of that money to free up that deficit. I mean, to reduce the deficit, excuse me. Sorry.
So very good question, sir. So thank you. In terms of the fair share, the millionaire's tax, whatever you want to call it, it will have to be part of the solution. So the task force that I mentioned has sort of identified that as the first place that will need to be sort of tapped. ANF is suggesting that the total revenue will be around $2 billion in 25, although it's volatile. We only have 2 years. If you consider that split 50-50, and it's been split actually a little bit more towards education because everyone knows they need assistance as well. But if all of transportation gets $1 billion, $1.1 billion, I don't think it's feasible to suggest that the T would get 700 million of that. I just don't think that would fly given the geographic spread of the legislature. So I think it'll be part of the solution. I don't think it will offer the entire solution. With that said, I did want to note that the administration and finance has already taken 250 million a year off the top of fair share revenue and used it to borrow money that will be going to 600 million to the T, 600 million to roads and bridges, which are also in desperate need. So it is part of the solution. I just want to be clear. I don't think it will be sufficient to be the entire solution.
Councillor Lucas, you're muted.
4.5 years into COVID. Still don't know how the mute button works. Thank you for your comments, and if I have any questions, I'll raise my hand again.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you. Councillor Block.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Kane, thank you for your presentation and for your work. You paint a pretty dire picture of the legislative path. It's almost as though there is no time for the legislature to be sworn in, organize itself, and make even a stopgap effort to avoid layoffs, which doesn't sound very promising. It makes me want to ask, you mentioned that there was no specific plan for us or the mayor to get behind. That feels like that feels very uncomfortable. That I don't know who is supposed to develop the plan, even if it's a short-term plan to buy some more time, but somebody has to do that, it seems to me. I don't, you're nodding. So what's the pressure point? I mean, I'm not asking you to ask us to do things, but where in this system is that being handled now? Because, you know, it's December and this is not very much time to do something major. So who's going to lead? Where's the leadership going to come from to put something together for us, the legislature, to debate and hopefully pass?
So, yes, you're absolutely right, sir. So the leadership's going to have to come from the governor, the lieutenant governor. And as I mentioned, you know, they are very much aware of this. I believe that they are waiting to hear the results of the task force that they impaneled, which is reporting at the end of the month. I am probably less optimistic than others about what that will say. But I am optimistic overall that we can solve this. Traditionally, when these things have happened, and they've happened a lot in the last 25 years, the legislature responds to what the administration of the day asks for. Unfortunately, administrations of the day, for various reasons over the last couple of decades, have tended to lowball the estimate, and that has led to a lot of where we're at today, unfortunately. I hope that the Healy Driscoll administration has learned that lesson from history. We've certainly talked to them about it, and that they will ask for a number that will allow us to stop lurching from crisis to crisis. To answer your question very specifically, I think you will see an answer in House 1, which the governor will file in January sometime. I am concerned on the legislative side how they will be able to respond to that, given that they have to get themselves organized. But with that said, the leadership is going to basically be the same in the House and the Senate, especially in Ways and Means. So I do think we can solve this. I do think they can solve this. With that said, the legislature doesn't move quickly for anybody. So we're going to have to keep the pressure on them and keep letting the folks that represent us know that this is important to our communities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor Bixby.
Thank you, and thanks for this really interesting presentation information. I guess my question is kind of about service levels. You know, you talked a little bit about some of those proposed system-wide service cuts, you know, that were proposed earlier, but I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of kind of nibbling around the edges with service cuts. You know, bus service in Newton, we just saw some commuter rail service cuts. And at what point, you know, are we balancing kind of the financial, you know, need for financial savings with suddenly nibbling so much that it's not a very usable system for people and people stop using it? That'd be kind of a bigger philosophical question, but be interested in your thoughts on that. Thanks.
No, absolutely, ma'am. So the T has embarked on a process of adding service in the inner core, and a lot of that is coming at the expense of service sort of in the 128 belt. So we've spoken to many communities, and I would include Newton in that. We've spoken to many communities, Burlington, Lexington, Norwood, sort of if you go around 128 around the region, that's where service is really being reduced in order to redeploy those assets, specifically the buses, into other parts of the region for a variety of reasons. So the advisory board itself, we've sort of said that that's not acceptable. We've taken a position that that's not a route to go down. We've taken a position that that was a plan approved by 2 boards ago with a different governor, and that it really needs a fresh look. So I understand what's happening with the 57 in Newton. I've spoken with David Kozis around your other routes. You've lost express routes on the Pike, which I think is ridiculous, quite frankly. I also, I say to folks at the T all the time that there's nothing written in stone that says they can only have a bus fleet of 1,000 buses, which is what they have. They have 1,000 to 1,100 buses. A region like this should really have a public transport provider with 2,000 buses and sufficient numbers of operators and everything else. Now that's a financial question, of course, but I think we could very easily see a 2,000 bus fleet operating in and around this region and starting to do things like reduce congestion on lots of our main thoroughfares in lots of our cities and towns. We're not going to get ourselves out of congestion without getting folks out of cars, but we need to also maintain the economic vitality of our cities and towns and and in your case, your villages. And so the way to do that is to keep the people, but lose the private automobiles, and the bus is the best, most efficient way to do that, quite frankly. So I take your point. I agree with it. I do think we need to think about this differently than it has been thought about. This is one of those situations, though, where because the T tends to lurch from crisis to crisis, like I mentioned, there's very little time to ever sort of step back and think about this holistically. That's why one of the many reasons why I hope we can sort of fix this for a couple of years at the very least, so we can stop doing this crisis management and start to think holistically about what is it we want our region to be like in terms of its public transportation provider.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Counselor Downs.
Thanks. You've talked a little bit about what happens if we go off that fiscal cliff, but maybe you could be a little bit more explicit. I mean, how are we an equitable community without the T? How are we going to have, better driving if we are all forced to drive to get where we want to go? That kind of thing. Have you run the numbers on the economic damage of not having a working T? What would that cost us? What would that cost the state? And I know the political reality of the western part of the state feels like they subsidize the eastern part of the state and don't want to pay more for the MBTA. I get that. But, it's also what makes the western part of the state as vibrant as it is.
You're absolutely right, counselors. So yeah, some quick just numbers. 80% of the state's population lives in the MBTA service district. Something like 97% of the state's economic activity takes place here. With due respect to our friends in Western Mass, who I have the utmost respect for, if this part of the Commonwealth fails, if this part of the Commonwealth gets a cold, they get the flu. They can't last without us. The money that flows from west to east is nothing in comparison to the money that flows east to west. I have those numbers. I'd be happy to share them. In terms of what this could cost, so you mentioned a few things there that I just wanted to follow up on. It's in every driver's interest that more people are on buses and trains than not. If you're a driver, if there's fewer cars on the road, you have a better commute, you have a better drive. So it's in every driver's interest to make sure that the T is as reliable, safe, comfortable, and convenient as possible, because it makes your drive easier. If you cannot get where you're going on the T, and lots of folks can't, I get that. It's in your interest to make sure that more folks are on it, because then there's less competition for the roadway. We've all seen, I think it's it used to be exit 17 in Newton. I'm not sure what they call it now. You can't get off the Pike there. You need fewer cars on the road, but we have to keep the people and the economic vitality and activity that they bring to our villages, cities, and town centers. In terms of the actual sort of economic, I would add environmental cost. Those numbers have been calculated. I don't have them in front of me. I'm in my basement in case you couldn't tell, so I don't have it. But that is available. It would be a significant cost. The ridership decline that would come from the service cuts that would be necessary if this is allowed to sort of go to the most negative extreme, is such that the cost to our environment, to our climate, to our economy, would be in the billions, and it's probably not what Massachusetts needs, especially coming into a new presidential administration where federal funds are likely to be less forthcoming than not.
Yeah, we aren't the only administration, the only part of the country that's facing a fiscal cliff. I know San Francisco's Muni and SEPTA are also, the only reason New York isn't on that list right now is because they may be able to implement congestion pricing and start subsidizing the transit with tolls for people who really shouldn't be driving into Midtown anyway. The economic and environmental costs are going to be really important for us to have as we formulate, as a city council, independent body from the mayor, our response to what you've just told us. You know, if we put together a resolution, I want the strongest arguments we can have. And if there are some that I'm overlooking, please highlight them now, because I'd like to be able to put that together and draft something. I think the mayor would be amenable to that because she knows how important the T is to Newton and to the regional economy on which Newton is also dependent.
Appreciate that. And, you know, my reluctance is only just for, just because it's the way my lines of authority go, but I'm sure Mayor Fuller would not mind if we work together. So let me see what I can get and share with you. Let me just also note this sort of thing that's sort of come to me recently that I've been thinking about. While this is scary, it's also a huge opportunity. No one has yet figured out how to refurbish pre-World War II infrastructure to be fit for purpose in the 21st century. Hasn't happened in Canada, hasn't happened in the United States. Most of the infrastructure in Europe outside of the UK is post-war because it got bombed. Same in Asia, most of it's post-war. So if we can figure out how to refurbish what we have, and what we have is really, really amazing if you think about it. For a city of Boston, the city the size of Boston and region the size of Boston, what we have is incredible. If we can figure out how to refurbish it through technology or new construction processes or procedures or whatever, that is something that we can export. That is a new technological skill that Massachusetts would have perfected and can export to the rest of the world, because everyone's infrastructure is aging. None of it's getting any younger. None of it's going to get better. None of it's going to get cheaper. So I look at that as an opportunity. I think we have very smart people. A lot of them live in Newton, who can figure this stuff out. It's a question of resources, but it's also a question of will. And I think we can do this. I really do. I think we have a lot of the right pieces in place. So we just have to decide to do it.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate your coming. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've kind of known this is out there, but just knowing how bad it is really helpful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I have just a couple final questions. The interchange that we just had between you and Councillor Downs really hit the main sort of thoughts on my mind. And one of them was going to be, how do nations abroad do it? Because I think a lot of us have been fortunate to be able to have experiences in different countries around the world where the public transit is just beautiful and functional. And I mean, when Councillor Lipoff was discussing his daughter's experiences, I was just thinking about how on a recent trip in Paris, I couldn't even come near accessing the public transportation without paying my fare. I mean, it wasn't even remotely a question that one would not. And you obviously address some of that in sort of the age of our system versus the timing of nations abroad, but are there other differences? I mean, is it in more of our governmental structure of how we pay for things, of what expectations are around, what a household is paying in taxes, that sort of thing? And can you pinpoint other reasons?
Well, I think the reasons are varied and many. A lot of it is sort of you get what you pay for. I read an article this morning about a $5 billion highway bypass in Alabama that's paid out with 100% of federal funds, that is expected to carry basically no people. It's not even on their top 3 list of things to do. Yet it's going to get funded by the federal government. And as we all know, Massachusetts is a net contributor, not a net recipient. So we're paying lots and lots of money to lots and lots of states who don't like how we live our lives. But anyway, so in terms of values, in terms of resources, in terms of where resources are allocated, I think a lot of it has to do with how different parts of the world utilize space. I think we've all of us who've had been fortunate enough to travel realize that folks in lots of other parts of the world tend to get by with less space than we tend to use here in the United States. And I think we in Massachusetts probably use less space than other folks in the United States. And with that in mind, I think folks are willing to come together and use public resources in different ways in different parts of the world. They don't expect to have the same level of kind of individual area around them. Gas taxes are significantly higher in most of the world, outside of totalitarian dictatorships, I guess I should add, where that is a societal choice that folks have made to invest in public goods rather than private transportation. And that's part and parcel of their values. It's not to say that our values are wrong, our values are bad, our values are at all flawed. It's just different. I think lots of us who've had the fortune to travel have seen the amazingness of other systems and knowing what we can have if we just put our minds to it. You mentioned the Paris Metro. I remember approaching a ticket agent there in very broken French trying to buy a ticket, and he spoke fluent English. Can you imagine an MBTA ticket taker speaking French? We can do this though. We just have to kind of make it a priority. And I guess that's the real answer to your question, Madam Chair, is prioritization. You get what you pay for, and we've paid a lot of money for a lot of our infrastructure, or I should say, our forebears paid a lot of money for our infrastructure, and it's really up to us in this generation to be good stewards of it and leave it to the next generation better in a way that it hasn't been left to us.
So that is a perfect segue to my other question from earlier in your presentation, because you made a comment that I repeat often with respect to our infrastructure here in Newton when I'm trying to explain to constituents why their kids are in a school building that is 100 years old, and despite a lot of money and effort and very hard work by really dedicated city staff, we still have tremendous amounts of potholes and infrastructure challenges all over our roads. And the sort of going thinking as well, the previous generation didn't maintain it, didn't invest in it. And I guess one of my questions to you, if you know or feel like is, what do you think happened then? I mean, where was the money going, if you know?
Well, I can only speak to the T. I actually just published a ridiculously long paper on this topic, so I will try not to bore you. During the periods when public transportation in Massachusetts has thrived, those tended to be the periods when the economy was good and when leadership at the gubernatorial and other levels thought it was worth investing in. and those times resources were allocated to it. And let's remember, in the late 70s and 80s, the red line was extended on two sides. The orange line was put underground. Commuter rail was massively expanded to lots and lots of different parts of the Commonwealth. We almost doubled the number of bus ridership, I should say. So this stuff can be done. It just has to get you just have to choose to do it. So it comes down to prioritization again, and that's a political process. There are bond bills and there are capital improvement plans. Every community has one, and the state has one, and the T has one, and the legislature does one. And that's really just a question of we need to put our resources where we think it will have the most benefit for us, for our economy, for our ecology, for our way of life. And I'm not sure we're doing that right now. I'm not sure we're having those hard enough discussions. You mentioned public school buildings. And again, a lot of those were built pre-war at a time when there were higher taxes in lots of places. Lots of money was decided to be spent on public infrastructure. It was seen to be a good thing to build public projects that reflected how you felt about your community. I've had the chance to visit many city and town halls. Almost all of them were built in the 20s and 30s. A lot of them were built during the Depression by the WPA, and they are really temples of civic goodness. And that reflected, I think, a priority for people at the time. And I don't know if it was privately funded, publicly funded. I can't tell you in each case, but I can tell you that I think then people felt that building such structures reflected on them as a community and as a people. And I think if you look at a lot of the train stations in Europe, that are survived, you look at South Station even. South Station's great. Grand Central, it's great. Some of the newer stuff, not so great. And I don't know why, but I do think a lot of it has to do with priorities and with wanting to reflect your own values back to others.
I think that's as thorough and thoughtful an answer as I could have hoped for. So thank you. Do we have other comments or questions? Or are we ready to wrap up this discussion?
I'm ready to move NAN unless somebody has another question.
Okay, we have a motion for no action necessary by Councillor Downs, which Mr. Kane, I'm sure you understand, just means that we've had our discussion and don't expect to take it up again at a future.
We're not going to have you back. We may
No
do
problem. I love parliamentary procedure.
All right, at least not on this topic and this particular docket item.
If you'll indulge me, Chair, I'd love to get a sense of the committee about, if I work with Mr. Kane and pull together a resolution, which is something we don't need to put to a vote, but can circulate around the council. I wanted to get a sense of the committee about how they'd feel about working on that or signing on to that.
Sure. Can I take feedback from folks for Councillor Downs?
I think so. I think it's a great idea. One thing though, what I'm hearing is, people are upset that you're not collecting all the payment, they don't have as much sympathy because, you're screaming you don't have enough money, but you're not collecting it. And that's something that really needs to be done. Thanks.
Agreed.
Councillor Block.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the question of resolutions, I wonder, we have two newly elected members of the House that will take office in January, I guess. We probably all know them personally. And maybe there's more personal outreach that we ought to do. I'm not opposed to resolutions, but I just wonder if there are other tools that we should think about. I will just say this, Senator Cream, who's our continuing representative in the legislature, I met with her not long ago to talk generally about things, and her view was I think consistent with Mr. Keynes, that it's really the governor who has to come up with the proposal, that the legislature itself is not going to do that. I mean, that's almost verbatim what she said to me and Councilor Farrell, who joined me in that meeting. So again, it's almost like, well, what's the best way to reach the governor and whoever she is relying on for these sorts of issues? And I don't know the answer to that. So that's just my kind of instincts about this.
Absolutely, but I mean, if we find it's not that I would be doing a resolution necessarily from us to the legislature. I had a similar conversation with Senator Cream today, but that, we need to send some message perhaps to the governor and copy the legislature. That's something, that kind of detail I'm happy to work on and to get input on, but would you be interested in signing such a resolution or thinking it through with me?
Sure.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Councilor Greenberg.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Downs. I'd be interested also. Thank you for doing that.
Others? And me as well, of course. I mean,
Okay.
it's an outrageous situation, honestly.
We can work from there.
Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councilor Downs. I think we all know that how should I say this? The T is going through many troubles right now. I think everyone knows what the problems are. But respectfully, I'm not going to sign on to the letter or resolution. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Good for now, Councilor Downs?
That's it. We've got a motion on the floor.
Okay, so we have a motion for no action necessary. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we have, I believe it's 8-0 at this point. Mr. Kane, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the presentation. It is a grim picture, and I think I can confidently say from all of us that we're really grateful for your really hard work and dedication in advocating to really tackle this incredibly difficult and important problem. So thank you for spending a good chunk of your evening with us. And we'll work in our committee and our council to see what we can agree to say together. Thank you.
Thank you for your service as well. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Okay, you
Good
too.
night.
And with that, we are concluded tonight, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.